Last week, I uploaded this video, and if you haven't checked it out already, I highly recommend you do, because this video is just building off of my points in the last. I ended up getting heaps of comments saying how there's a better version of the hurricane bow, and it's better to use that, but the question is it really that much better? Well, there's only really one way to find out, so with all that being said, let's get straight into testing. Alrighty, so as you can see in the last video, I was talking about the hurricane bow and how that bow is very viable for archer players inside of dungeons. However, I got a lot of comments of people telling me to use the Venom's bow because the Venom's bow is so much better. It's the new one, it's the one that everyone's using, and there's a lot more viability with that weapon than there is the hurricane bow. Now, this is all very true. I just wanted to make the video that I made last week as I was talking about the old meta, which was incredibly viable, and I wanted to bring the hurricane bow back to light as it was getting very little recognition for the real capabilities that it actually has. But now that I have that out of the way, I'm going to make an entire separate video today here on the Venom's Touch, talk about whether it's worth the extra couple 100,000 coins, and then share my thoughts on it and say what I think about the bow overall and how it affects you as a player if you choose to play Archer in dungeons. So just like in the previous video, I'm going to go over the basic stats of the Venom's Touch here, but before I get straight into that, I just want to say that I do have the hurricane bow right here for a comparison as well. So just to show you guys the enchants of both of them very quickly here, this one's got chance for power 6 and infinite quiver 10. The main thing about this bow is that I've put power 6 on it and it's got the spiritual reforge, while the hurricane bow, which I tested in the last video, has only got power 5. It also has punch 2 and the reforge is unreal instead of spiritual. Now this is something to notice because I had two completely different bows. As you could see, this one's even got rend on it, and like I mentioned in the previous video, rend is not necessary, and you will see how I used it in the footage later on, but it is very viable if you are able to afford it, and I would recommend getting rend if you want to spend an extra couple 100,000 coins just to make your bow that extra bit stronger. But with that being said, let's just showcase the damage stats of this bow. So right off the bat here, we've got 300 base damage, and then we get 180 strength, but the spiritual reforge buffs that by plus 20, and the crit chance and crit damage is because of the spiritual reforge, so I wouldn't really count that, but that's just the stats we've got on this weapon here. Now for the bonus of the Venom's Touch, it says that it fires a volley of 5 arrows, and the arrows all apply venom to the enemies that they hit, which deals a certain amount of damage for every second over 3 seconds. Now that says 456 damage right now, however this does fluctuate depending on what you're holding. It also fluctuates on your stats, and it changes drastically depending on the environment that you're in. So right now it does say that it's got a 456 damage multiplier thingy on it, although that's not really accurate. I know that it changes from time to time, so I figured I'd throw that out there just before we get into all the rest of the video. Now, if we're going to compare it to the hurricane bow here, the hurricane bow seems completely underwhelming as a comparison to the Venom's Touch. These are both epic bows here, so their reforges will stay somewhat similar, I want to say, although the crit chance and crit damage for the Unreal Reforge is definitely not as strong as the Spiritual Reforge, and the strength is also not as strong either. And then for the actual base damage and strength stats, this bow is significantly weaker than that of the Venom's Touch. And like I said before, I don't even have power 6 on this weapon, I've only put power 5. So you might be thinking already, well, this is a very unfair test, and there's far too many factors that are going to come into play when the damage tests do happen. However, to that, I will say that you will be very surprised on the results that I got when testing in dungeons. And ultimately, this bow was going to be stronger regardless of whether the enchants were different or not. And I wasn't going to go out and spend an extra couple million coins to get the enchants on the same level. I wasn't going to slap rend on this bow since, like I said, rend is not useful, and I will prove that with my damage tests. But it's always good to go over a basic stat review so you guys are aware of the bows that we'll be using in today's video. So if it wasn't clear already now, the Venom's Touch is quite literally just an upgraded version of the hurricane bow. If I go ahead and grab these in my hotbar and show you how their arrows actually behave, when I shoot out the Venom's Touch, it shoots out a volley of 5 arrows, and then with a maxed out hurricane bow, it does the exact same thing. They both behave in a very similar way with the same attack pattern, however one just does more damage than the other, which is the reason why you guys were telling me to test out the Venom's Touch and not the hurricane, as it's just an upgraded version of the hurricane bow. Now just like in the the previous video, I did say that these weapons are not dungeonizable, and I did check the Venom's Touch because it is technically a spider bow to see if you could use spider essence to dungeonize this, but you cannot. It is not dungeonizable, and same with the hurricane bow. However, that is not going to be a problem at all, and you guys will see exactly why that is the case in the dungeon runs, which I'll get into later on in the video. So now that we've covered the basic stats of both of these weapons, I'm going to go ahead and cover the cost and cover a couple of other things about these two bows, and give a bit of a preface before we get into the dungeon runs and show off the damage to see if these bows are even worth trying to begin with. So in the previous video, I did go over and show you guys the hurricane bows that were around 120,000 coins. Now they have gone up to about 200k per bow, which is still very, very affordable and a very great price for a clean weapon. And there's even one here that's already maxed out with all the enchants you'll need. It's got Unreal and everything of the sorts, and it's got the kills required for a cheaper price than the clean ones as well. So I'm sure you guys can definitely snag some good deals with the hurricane bows. However, with the Venom's Touch, there are currently none of the fragged ones on the auction house except for this one right here, which does happen to be 2.5 million coins. It has no reforges on it, and it's got some really bad enchants on it too. So I'm not too sure why this is the case. I'm aware that these can be a lot cheaper, especially if you do buy the unfragmented ones. And like you can see right here, this one's 500k, this one's about 500k as well. There's an enchanted one with some dodgy enchants, which is about 500k as well. There's a bunch of other random ones that go for around 500 to 550k. However, if we go ahead and look at the actual recipe to make the fragmented Venom's Touch, if we go off of the price of the auction house for the bow, this was about 500,000 coins to get. Now, if we add on the cost of both of these Dark Queen soul drops, they were about 200k per on the auction house at the time of me recording this video. So that brings our total cost up by 400,000 coins. Then both of these enchanted spider eyes are about 80k per stack, so if we add on the extra 160k per stack for each of the eyes, and then we add around 250,000 coins for all the soul string, this brings the entire price of this bow to about 1.3 million coins. But just to keep things really consistent, I'm going to round everything up to 1.5 million. I know that's not super accurate, but for the sake of this video, we're going to say this bow is worth 1.5 million coins. So now that we have the cost of both of these weapons, the Venom's Touch is 1.5 million, and then the Hurricane's bow is around 200,000 coins. You can definitely see that this is 100% a pretty big step up, and it's also not incredibly expensive. It is very affordable for most people, but it's still quite the jump from this price nonetheless. If you're going to go out and spend an extra 1.3 million coins to be upgrading your bow from a Hurricane to a Venom's Touch, you would expect it to be a very great weapon, or at least an insane upgrade to it. But either way, it's still a very affordable price for most people, so if you're someone who just likes to have that extra bit of damage, by all means, go ahead and buy one. But now that we have all of that stuff out of the way, let's hop straight into the dungeon runs. I went onto floor 4 and floor 5 for both of these tests, where I'll commentate over some footage that I recorded earlier with both of these weapons and did a little bit of a comparison on. And we'll get some more accurate numbers off of those tests and give my final thoughts on both of these weapons in the next part of the video. So moving into a floor 4 run here, I had no issues at all when dealing with these mobs in this first room, and also the angry archaeologist that came with it. The Venom's Touch had no trouble at all bursting down the angry archaeologist, and this bursting down theme effectively played out for the entirety of the dungeons. I was able to do the exact same thing to this frozen adventurer, keeping my distance on it while still shredding through its HP. When it came to clearing out the blood room, it's evident that cleaning out the mobs is a very simple task. The same trend happened in the boss room. I was doing lots of damage to all of the mobs that huddled around in a big group, and even when I switched to the Hurricane bow, my damage really wasn't hurt that drastically, and the DPS stayed very consistent. These bows work so well in dungeons due to the sheer amount of arrows they fire at a time, and even with no stars or special bonuses, the Archer class's ranged attack boost paired with a solid team, and of course these two weapons, allows you to melt through almost anything, and as you can see, it's even strong enough to take Yellow Room Shadow Assassins, and also many other Yellow Rooms in different dungeon runs. But most importantly, it handles the Livids in the boss fight very efficiently as well. And before we head back to the main part of the video, I am aware this is not the best strategy to do floor 5, but it is the best way for me to display to you guys how strong this bow truly is, as you can see, being able to completely shred through these Livids and beat the run. So as you can see, the capability of this weapon is absolutely insane. As you would have expected, it is just as good as the Hurricane Bow, although it does do everything the Hurricane Bow does, just slightly more effectively. Now, the important part of a damage test like the one that I did in this video is the fact that we need to really weigh up the cost of whether that extra damage that the Venom's Touch does give you is worth that extra 1.3 million coins. Now, if you weren't paying too much attention to the dungeon runs, the damage of the Venom's Touch was around 30 to 50,000 damage more than the Hurricane Bow was doing, which is very, very substantial if you do take into account the amount of arrows that I was able to sink into a lot of the mobs. And because each and every one of those arrows was doing around 30 to 50,000 more damage than a Hurricane Bow, that does rack up to be somewhere in the millions of DPS that you do miss out on if you are using a Hurricane over the Venom's Touch. But even with all that being said, the Hurricane Bow still has some insane capabilities and is definitely not a bad choice for the budget option. Both these weapons are a lot of fun to use. You're able to spray and pray and just gun things down super quickly, and you just burst things in a matter of seconds. And honestly, this is one of my favorite metas of all time, and also one of my favorite arch weapons that I could still be using to this day. But when it comes to full functionality of both of these bows, they both pass the test as they are quite literally just the exact same thing, but the Venom's Touch just has some higher damage numbers. So now that we have all that stuff covered and out of the way, it really just leaves the last question of whether the Venom's Touch is worth purchasing. Now, for the most part, I would say 100% yes, because there is a pretty substantial damage difference between both of the bows. If you're able to afford the extra 1.3 million coins, by all means, go for it. It'll help you out drastically and make a big difference when fighting livid bosses or just fighting anything from floors 1 to 5. However, if you do want to get a Hurricane Bow, I would definitely recommend that as well. It's still just as great, just a little bit less efficient than the Venom's Touch actually is. But both these bows serve a very great purpose for starting archers, and it's a very great option to be using before you can afford boomerangs. But with all that being said, that's going to wrap up everything that I had for today's video, guys. So if you all did find this useful or informative in some way, please do leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel, as I make Hypixel Skyblock videos every Wednesdays and Fridays. And also, if you have any further questions about each of these bows, or you would like some more insight or a couple more damage tests with both of these weapons in a different situation, I stream live on Twitch every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You can always come stop by over there and have a chat to me when I'm live, and that's a very great place to be. But with all that being said, that's going to wrap up everything that I had for today's video. And as always, take care and peace. Why is this guy saying to marry him? Dude, that's kind of weird, bro. That's kind of weird. I'm already taken, man. I have like 5 girlfriends. I don't think they'd be happy with that. I just realized what I just said.